at this point, I'll invite my panelists back on, so you can go ahead and join here. All right. Hey, Jono. Nicole. There's Matt. All right. So Matt, I know you were just talking, but we did have a couple questions that came up. So I'll start off with you. One of the questions that came up is, can you leverage token creations from Vault for Consul as part of the ACL process? Or maybe talk a little bit about how you would use Consul and Vault together.
Right. So Vault, it does have the secrets engine, which if you're not using Consul as a storage backend for Vault, you can use it and it will mint tokens and for you. It doesn't automatically create the policies and roles for you, but so when you're setting up Vault, you essentially give a Vault role and you tell it, I want this role to mint tokens with these predefined list of policies and roles. And so it can handle that for you and handle the life cycle of those tokens.
Awesome, thank you. Jono, back on your presentation, one of the things that you showed was your values.yaml file. So did you have to merge in your custom values with that file in order to get it to do what you wanted to for the demo?
So for that particular instance, all I did is I had the separate file and it overlays on top of the existing one that comes with the Helm chart. So you can either pull that values file from the Helm chart, edit it, or maintain your own separate from the Helm chart and apply it, and it works together.
Thank you. Cody, so one of the questions that came up during your session was talking about a best practice around deploying a sidecar as another VM. Do you recommend that, or what do you think is the right approach for that?
Generally, I think it is, right? I mean, when you look at the Kubernetes model, these run as sidecars for the pods. So really they live next to each other anyways in like a Kubernetes environment where sidecars are much more common. I think that the perceived benefits of separating these out into different machines is probably not going to be realized as much as the convenience and the capability to keep your application kind of co-located in one system. I would say best practice on the VM side would likely be to fold those in, to have Envoy running inside. And in my case, I run it as like a systemd job, right? So I have the binary down for Envoy. I have a job running. I can push that out to new nodes using like any config management tool like a Puppet or a Chef or an Ansible to create that job and have that running alongside. And it just bolts right onto the service. So when the service registers, that Envoy sidecar is registering against that service on the same node.
Awesome, thank you.
No
Matt,
auto-tune this time?
No auto-tune this time. Matt, so one of the questions that came up also, and I know this is kind of what you covered in your whole session, but just maybe real quickly, just as like a recap, what were some of the best practices that you mentioned for managing ACL tokens? So maybe what to do, how to retire and rotate them, things like that.
So starting from the policy level on up, like it comes, like the first good thing is properly scoping your policies, right? You don't want to be duplicating stuff, permissions all over the place. And then you have so many things that need to use the same permissions, you end up having to make tons of edits to have that permission apply, just because you deployed a new version of a service which is slightly different and requires modified permissions. The second big thing is don't like make the same token over and over again with the same policies. You really want to have that intermediary role in there as the place to roll up all those other policies. If not, you end up with a lot more edits. So one of the key things is trying to find the best place to link things in, whether it be at the role level or granting permissions in the policies, to minimize the number of places that you have to change when you inevitably evolve your infrastructure, right? And so as far as tokens, use automation. Don't do what I did and do it all through the UI or CLI. It's good for like a quick, it's good for a demo to show like actually how you would go through and create these things in the UI. But beyond like a small scale, you're really gonna wanna automate all of this. So go look at our API docs and or the Vault secret engine. or even the Terraform provider has a way to manage these for you as well if you wanted to do it in like HCL as code.
Awesome. Cody, question for you. So you talked a little bit around HCS versus some of the other demos, which were really focusing more on like either console open source, or in Matt's case, he showed like console enterprise. Do you think you could walk through a little bit of maybe some of the benefits of using like HCS? Like what are some of the operational headaches that you might run into if you're trying to manage your cluster on your own?
Yeah, so when I look at like managing a cluster on my own, let's take a step back and let's talk about how I do this when I'm not using HCS. There's a few layers that I have to account for, right? I have to account for how I'm deploying my server nodes in a consistent manner, right? So I need to have some form of automation around that. Am I going to use Ansible, Chef, and Puppet to push this out to machines as they deploy? Am I going to keep that stuff stored in like Git as a consistent place? Like as far as like configurations go, when I want to scale that out or I want to change the configuration, how am I managing that on the back end? How am I worrying about scale considerations in themselves, throughput, consistency of configuration, drift? These are all things that are like operational problems that people have to solve. In my case, when I do it, I tend to wrap this all into like the most duct tapey Packer build that I can for my server image, and then I deploy out a bunch of server nodes, and I just kind of hope that I don't need to change anything. And then when I do want to change something, I go and I rebuild that Packer image. But this is now something that if I translate this into the enterprise, this is the process that I know how to do, and I have to make sure other people know how to do when a change comes up, right? When I want to change the way the system works or change the configuration. Looking at things like Matt presented, talking about like ACLs, we're going to be bringing ACLs to be kind of a first class thing, or not first class, that's not the right word, but like ACLs configured by default in HCS, and as well as like the encryption being configured by default. These are all things that you normally have to account for when you're configuring the environment, but with HCS, it's just there. Right, and that's all operational things that are now offloaded onto HashiCorp's SRE team to manage. When a node stops working, that's not your problem. That's the SRE team's problem to solve. I'm a big fan, like when I was in an enterprise and worked in the enterprise, I was a big fan of technology to let me just get back to doing my job and get it to do the things that mattered. And we have a ton of things layered on often that don't really matter to the things that our customers want us to do. And we have customers like when we're working in the enterprise too, like if I'm in IT, HR might be my customer asking me to get their system up and running. They don't care how many console nodes I'm running. They don't care about the time it takes me to scale out console. They care about, is their application registered? Is it healthy, reachable? Do they have connectivity? Like, and really, they don't even care about that stuff. They care about going to a web page and it loading up. Like all that back-end stuff that happens is stuff that I have to worry about operationally. And taking the pile of work of managing a fleet of infrastructure is something that I'm more than happy to take off my plate. That's not for everybody, right? Some shops have manpower to be able to do that and manage that infrastructure, and that's just part of their operational model. But I think when we look at the majority of these things moving to a managed service model, look at things like database, right? Like there was a time where databases were something that people always were going to hold on to. They would never run a cloud native database. They would never run this in the cloud because they needed to know all of the configurations and manage it end to end. And that like mindset has drastically shifted. People are more than happy to have Amazon throw out an RDS database or run it in Azure and run a managed database offering there, because it's unnecessary overhead. HCS is just the next logical progression of moving things to a more managed service model.
Awesome, thank you. So John or Nicole, I'll throw this out to either one of you. Can kind of split came in right between your two sessions. Could either of you walk a little bit through mesh gateways and just kind of explain what they are and how they're used? Just because I think there was some question about connecting multiple console clusters. So Nicole, I see you raise your hand, so I'll let you go through.
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Right now, that process is a little convoluted. Coming out soon, we will have WAN federation, which will make it possible for you to actually federate two consoles clusters together through the mesh gateways and only have to expose the mesh gateways through the internet. And so that process makes that a lot easier. Right now, you either have to find a way to expose the console servers to one another so that they can communicate directly, or you have to bridge the networks using VPC peering or something along those lines to make it happen. But with the WAN federation that's coming out, and I believe the next release is the target that should make this a lot simpler.
Thank you. And that actually feeds good into the next question for you, Matt, which is, are ACLs and TLS mandatory for federating Consul?
Technically, no, they are not. You can set up Consul without ACLs, without TLS. It will work. But as you start to use more of the features, like when you go into using service mesh and intentions, if you don't have ACLs and you don't have TLS enabled, then none of the other stuff is actually getting you any security either. Because if you can make a request to Consul without an ACL token and get that certificate, anyone can, so that certificate is sort of meaningless, right? So if maybe for some service discovery scenarios where you're super firewalled off, locked everything down, and other means, maybe you are okay with running without ACLs and TLS, but I would say in the general case, you probably want it even though you can set it up without it.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll give it a second here just to see if we have any other questions come in. Again, I just want to point out the slide that we're sharing, the QR code is going to give you resources to a lot of this information that we covered today. It'll help you walk through the different tracks. So make sure you do that. And also as a reminder, we are recording the session. We're going to be breaking it up into each of the different components, adding them as individual resources. So it's going to take us a little bit longer than our normal webinar turnaround time, but we will be making it available to everybody in addition with the links in a follow-up email to everybody who registered for this. All right, looks like we don't have any other questions coming through, and we are right at the top of the hour. So we did say this was going to be a 3-hour event. We're right at 3 hours. I think we can go ahead and wrap it there. I want to thank our panelists so much again, just for being on here and answering these questions and walking through all these presentations. We know this is a little bit of a different format than we've done traditionally. It's a little bit longer form. But I think there's a lot of good information that'll hopefully help you along your service networking journey. So thank you all for joining. And as always, feel free to reach out to us. I also want to say a huge thank you to Sriram and Eric for their presentations early on from Mercedes and from F5 respectively. Great partners and great customers of ours. And so what we will do is if there are any other questions that we weren't able to answer, we will go ahead and follow them up in an email afterwards. So give me 1 second. I think we have one more question just come in as I was doing that. Let's see. So I believe this question was around just like some of the steps from Matt's demo. My recommendation would be utilizing some of the learn tracks that we put in there as far as looking for a step-by-step. Matt, real quick, did you want to cover just like how intentions utilize ACLs?
Sure. The short answer is that they don't. It's a different sort of arena of our security model. So you need the proper ACL setup in order to create and modify intentions. But after that, the service-to-service communication is governed by intentions only.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a list of them on here and just wanted to make sure I covered everybody before we signed off. So we'll leave it one more second. All right. I don't think anybody needs to hear me go through my long conclusion again, but I want to thank everybody one more time, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you all for joining.